My name is Dusity Sarangarmagan. I'm from the University of New Mexico. My academic focus is in clinical informatics. I'm double boarded in clinical informatics and have been the Chief Medical Information Officer, one of them for our health system for the last 7 years. So in that role, I do a lot of change. I am constantly trying to influence behavior, which is not what I was sold when they told me that I would be doing informatics. I thought I would get to deal with computers and maybe make processes a little. No, that's not what I do. I do a lot of people behavioral changes. So I think for any change project that you want to do, you're going to have to get very good at change management. All right, I have nothing to disclose. I don't work for anything. I don't get paid extra money for doing any of this. All right, so our objectives, we're going to talk about the natural history of change, what is change, and try to set some groundwork for some just basic definitions, so that way we can speak the same language. We're also going to talk about the diffusion of innovation theory, which I assume most of you have probably heard about, and then Kotter's 8-step method. Can I get a show of hands to see how many people have heard about the diffusion of innovations? Oh, less than I thought. Okay, what about Kotter? Okay. Everybody read the book? The Leading Change book? Yeah, okay. All right, well, that's good. That way I have an idea of what I'm working with. All right, so, no. Okay, all right, good. Well, at least you're listening, so that's a good start. So change. I'm going to try to convince you that change is predictable. Right? You know, if nothing else, that change is going to happen. What you don't know is the outcome, and what you hope to manage is that outcome. And you're going to have two types of outcomes, right? The outcomes that are intended, what you hope to have happened, and what's scarier, the unintended or unanticipated outcomes. So keep that in mind. Whatever change effort you're going to lead, you're going to have to pay attention to the things you don't expect to happen. Change in itself is a neutral event. I know that's not typical. Everyone hates change. But the change itself, as I said, is going to happen one way or the other. It's really the outcome that you can decide is good or bad. And change has to happen if you want extraordinary results. And out of change, really beautiful things can happen. Okay, so the people are really what drives change, human capital. So people dislike change, even if they absolutely hate the current system. I hate my job, I hate my boss, I don't like how much I get paid, the residents, they don't like the taste of coffee. I mean, all kinds of things, right? They will complain. But if you offer to change that, no, it's better that we like this better. Because the fear of the unknown really scares people. That's very compelling, the fear of the unknown. So for transformations to be successful, you have to change the culture. You have to change that fear. And people can make any change initiative succeed or fail. All right? And unfortunately, people are often wrong. Yes? Yeah. Yep. So here are some people who were sure that they were right. I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers. Thomas Watson, he's the chairman of IBM, 1943. Albert Einstein, there's not the slightest indication that nuclear energy will ever be obtainable. You'd have to split the atom. 1932. And my all-time favorite, ladies, sensible and responsible women do not ever want to vote. That's Grover Cleveland, 1905. I don't know. It didn't work as well as I had hoped this would, but this is a Homer moment, right? And we've all had these moments where we're absolutely sure this is going to be the worst thing that ever happened to us if we enact this change. All right, the diffusion of innovation theory. This is really important to know if you're going to target your message to your audience and to get them to adapt or adopt your change. All right? So Everett Rogers, who's actually a rural sociologist, and this theory came about looking at farming practices, said that everybody, all of us, can be separated into 5 major groups. The innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, late majority, and the laggards, all right? So your innovators, those are the people that are in line for the iPhone the day before the iPhone hits the stores, right? They need to have the latest gadget, the newest thing. They want to try every new thing. They're blogging about it before it's even come out. Those are your innovators. You have to do very little to convince your innovator group to change. I wouldn't expend any energy, honestly, because they'll probably come to you. Like, you just have to give them a little whiff of it, and they're already there waiting to help you. Your early adopters. Your early adopters are actually your target audience, all right? They are you guys. They're the opinion leaders, the thought leaders in your organization. They convince other people to enact change, to adopt a change. So when I'm going to make a change in the EHR, I try to find all of the opinion leaders and sway them over to my cause first, because they cause a ripple effect. Then there's a chasm, right? And that chasm has been called various things. I'm sure most of you have heard about the tipping point, right? That is the chasm. So you need to get your innovators and your early adopters to agree to your change, and then at that point you hit the tipping point and everybody comes along with you, theoretically speaking. So the early majority are the people who will adopt something maybe slightly faster than average. All right? They are influenced by the successes of other people. So your early adopter group tends to make very rational decisions, not as risky as the innovator group, and the early majority will follow along. The late majority typically won't do it until it's hit mainstream. Like, everybody's doing it, so now I'll do it because it's safe, it's been proven effective, it's plug and play. That's your late majority group. And then the laggard group is like, I will never change, no matter what. I would say that this isn't true for every instance, for every change, right? So I am maybe an innovator if you talk about the EHR. I'm willing to pretty much try everything. I'll pilot everything in a small test environment, implement it. I don't have a Facebook account. So I am clearly a laggard in that regard. So where you fall in that spectrum will change depending on the circumstance. Here's a different depiction of the same thing. So an innovator. Oh, those ideas are so fragile. Let's nurture it and support it and water it. Let's let it grow. Your early majority would say, your early adopters would say, that's the craziest idea I've ever seen, but maybe worth considering. Your early majority will say, oh, that's a little risky, I don't know. And your late majority will say, if it was such a good idea, why isn't it already being done? And my all-time favorite, you guys have this at I'm sure your groups have this person, you know who they are. Let's just kill the idea. It's terrible. Like, down with change. Never will we do this. Okay. So now that you know your target audience, what you need to do, what we would like to talk about next is the different types of change and how that affects that audience. So you can talk about change in first order versus second order, which is probably the more common terminology that's used. So a first order change is a variation in the way processes has been done. A second order change is a change to the system itself. All right. So a good example of first order change, and I'm just going to use the EHR because that's what I'm most familiar with, but I'm sure you guys can come up with your own examples. So a first order change would be I refine a process, right? I create maybe some clinical decision support or an additional reporting method, or you change the workflow, you tweak your workflow a little bit so you're slightly more efficient. That's a first order change. A second order change would be something like switching completely from paper records to electronic records. Or I think someone was going from Meditech to Epic. That would be a complete second order change. And the reason why second order changes happen typically is because the system would die if you don't make the change. So there's some sort of pressure on the system, whether that's fiscal or Political, that if you don't make the change, the system falls apart, and so you're compelled and forced to make that drastic of a change. Micro and mega changes are another way you can think about it's the same concepts. A micro change is akin to a first order change, a mega change is akin to a second order change. I think what's important to note about micro versus mega changes, micro changes are differences in degree, and mega changes are differences in kind, right? So when you're talking about a micro change, most of the time, micro changes as perceived by higher level personnel in your group tend to be, we think of them as minimal, right? But they often affect your front line significantly. There's things that you might never feel in your position, but your front line staff, your interns, your clerks, they definitely feel micro changes. Whereas mega changes, those are the types of changes that you'll often feel at a higher level. So that might be complete shifts of chairmans or changes in staffing models, adding a new hospital, that kind of thing. Those are mega changes. So knowing where your change effort is going to make the most impact is really important. All right, and then the last 4 types of changes that I wanted to make sure you understand is operational versus strategic versus cultural and political changes. So operational changes are changes in processes, right? When we're trying to tweak little things that might make, or sometimes big things, make our workflow better. Strategic changes tend to be about organizational philosophy, right? You're going to go from being a very critical care driven educational group to being a more EMS driven educational group. Those are more strategic. Cultural changes, again, have to do with the philosophy of the group, if you're what type of care you're providing, perhaps. And then political, that usually has to do with personnel. All right. There's nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. And that's what we're suggesting you do here, right? We're saying we want you to take a project, do something different, and take the lead on it. I did not have a thick skin before I took this job as an informaticist, and I now have one, because it is, people react very badly sometimes to change. So be prepared for that. That way you don't get sideswiped the way I did when I first started. All right. So what is change management? What are we going to actually ask you to do as part of this project? Well, first, we want you to get people to embrace change. You're going to facilitate change, get them to accept the change, and that can be very difficult. So there are some tools that I'm going to try to give you today that might help with that. You're hopefully going to transform your organization, and you're going to move your people from a current state to a desired future state. Has anyone tried to do this? I'm sure you all have. Anybody? Can I hear an example of a change effort that someone made that may not have gone as well as you thought?
One that's not going well.
Let's hear it.
Our department is in a rapid area. Splitsville, we call it. And our average age of location is 90, so we don't have enough patients to go to the Splitsville area. So the people in Splitsville are upset because they're not seeing enough people, and then the other teams are overwhelmed. So it's a big mess right now.
Yeah, and what have you guys done to try to address that?
Address it, we still work.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anyone else?
Just starting a new residency and having residents in the department for the first time ever. And getting the nurses to buy in that, no, they're a doctor, I promise. I need you to get them. They just kind of overlooked them as if they were students in the beginning. And just, having to say, no, I really need you to go to resident. I really need you to buy into their part of the process now.
That's a mega change.
Huge culture change. We didn't even have residents from other programs rotating with us prior to our start.
Okay. Fiona, I heard, do you have one?
Not just trying to get people introduced to it. So when our residents
their job is to protect their patients from the nurses. So, you know, it was very difficult to actually get our residents initially, like, the buy-in of the nurses. And so the first month, they were like, you know, the residents had to go around the nurses and introduce themselves to the patients. Like, they had to get in there before the nurses got there, because once the nurses got in there, they were not going to get it. So they had to build a relationship before the nurses saw the patients. And then by the second month, we ended up going in and talking to the nurses again, and so on and so forth. And by the third month, we actually referred our residents to the family medicine residency because they had really demonstrated all of this sort of diligence and support and so on and so forth. So then they do another sort of, so technically it was a constant rapid failure sort of process. And by the end of the first year, it was an overwhelming success that they were getting a lot of deliveries and they're doing a great job and it's all fine, but
it took a year.
So first it was a mega change, and then it was a number of micro changes. It was a lot about communication,
tweaking,
pivoting, and framing. So we had to do a lot of communication with it. Because I think when we talk about change, we talk about failure. It's never going to be a single change. It's going to be a lot of. It's going to be one big mega change, and then there's going to be a lot of micro changes, and also preparation for that change. So we actually had gone in and introduced ourselves to nurses before our residents came to try to pave the way and try to kind of come. It didn't work as well as we had hoped.
Absolutely. I think most change efforts, there's kind of maybe an overarching change effort and then multiple other smaller change efforts below that are ongoing at the same time. And Cotter addresses that in his book as well. So what's interesting to me about change management is that despite the thousands of theories, I mean, if you go to the Harvard Business Review, there's just like article after article after article. 70% of change efforts fail. 70%. And this is a room of like this, probably the smartest people I know. And 70% of our efforts fail. And why is that? I think that, and I'll tell you what I think, but this isn't scientific, but I think that most of our change efforts fail because we want to skip. We want instant gratification, right? We just want it to just happen. We want people to just accept this new order of things. And that rarely ever goes well. So, we're going to switch gears here. We're going to change. And I'm going to talk about Cotter's 8-step method. And it's a little rigid, I think. But I think if you stick to it, the general idea of it, it can help you make your transformations more successful. Okay? Is anyone in here a Game of Thrones fan? That's it? There's like 5 Game of Thrones fans in here? Oh, I'm so sorry. This lecture may not, you may not find this so interesting. I apologize. I am a big Game of Thrones fan. And so is Keel. And so I had put this lecture together and sent it to him. And he's like, you know, GCD, that's okay. But it would be really good if you added Game of Thrones. So you can blame him for that, for this. All right. So we're going to talk about Daenerys Targaryen, who is the queen of all queens in Game of Thrones. And she is an expert change manager. So that's how we're going to talk about change management, because otherwise it's a little boring. All right. So Cotter has 8 steps that are broken down to 3 main big categories for change management. So the first big category is creating a climate for change. And under that, you have to first create a sense of urgency. Then second, build a guiding coalition. And third, form a strategic vision. That's all under creating a climate for change. Notice there that nothing has happened yet. We haven't actually changed anything yet. We're just creating the environment so that change might be able to happen. In the second big group, we're engaging and enabling the organization. So you want to enlist a volunteer army here. He originally used that to mean communicate your vision, which is the same thing. Enabling action, and to do that, you're removing barriers. And then the third step in that second category is to generate short-term wins, which I think we're terrible at in medicine. I have to say, we're really bad about short-term wins. We want to have it all at once. But that will be a failure if you do that. And finally is when you actually start making the change. So that's like step 7. So step 7, you're going to implement and sustain your change by sustaining acceleration, and then you're going to institute the change and make it stick. All right? So this is Daenerys Targaryen. I hope I don't spoil the series for anybody. I apologize in advance if I do. Just stop listening whenever I say her name if you don't want to have the series spoiled. So, Daenerys Targaryen in season 1 is married off to Khal Drogo, who's the head of the Khalasar. And she feels like it's her rightful birthright, to rule all of Westeros. All right? And she tries to convince Khal Drogo to go to Westeros. He's a part of the Horsemen, to go across the ocean to Westeros and, take back her throne. And he won't do it. Then, later on in the season, she gets pregnant and there's an attempt on her life. Well, let me tell you, there is nothing like an attempt on your life to generate a sense of urgency. So, she's able to convince the entire Khalasar that they need to go to Westeros. And she gets to eat a horse's heart, but that's not that important. To go there and take over all of Westeros. So, if you are going to get people to change, you must convince them that this is an urgent, important matter, right? If it's only urgent and important to you, why would anyone else bother? It has to be something that's important to them. So, ask yourself, is this truly important? And not just to you. Is it really important to your organization? Look for missed opportunities and possible losses. So where are you not making the gains that you could be making? Where are you losing where you could be keeping those gains? And persuade your thought leaders that the current state is worse than a future unknown. That it is better to do something than do nothing. All right? Don't underestimate how hard that will be. That will be really hard to convince people to go into the unknown. But if you don't do this, you'll never get enough momentum in your change effort to convince people that what you want to do is worthwhile. All right. So the next step in the Cotter's 8-step method is to build a guiding coalition. And Daenerys is an expert, right? She gathers people from all over Westeros to join her mission. She has Dario, who's the head of the Second Sons, and Tyrion, who's just a little baby genius, and Missandei, who can speak every language, and Jorah, who's a very well-respected knight, and she has more. And that's just all I could get in this picture. So forming a guiding coalition of respected individuals to help support your change is imperative. All right? Because, as I said in the diffusion of innovation, if you can't get your opinion leaders on, you will never move that early majority over across the chasm. All right? So, involve your thought leaders. And a thought leader, I just want to point out, doesn't necessarily need to have a title. All right? Because just because they have a title doesn't mean they have influence. So, in some ways, let's say you're trying to get your interns to move, right? Having the department chair on your team may not help you at all. Sorry, department chairs. But it really might not. It might be more worthwhile to get another resident who is very well respected on your team by the residents because they, quote, understand what it's like. Does that make sense? So not having titled people necessarily, but influential people, I think are important. And then at this step, it becomes very tempting because we're all tight on time to promote someone into the project leader position, right? You place them there and you say, you lead this. This is great for your promotion. You do this project. It will almost inevitably fail if you do that. You must stay involved. If this isn't truly an important issue to you, you cannot assign it to, what I see happen a lot is the chief QA resident. No, that will not go well. It is better that you stay involved as the formal leader than assigning your project to a project manager type role. All right. So get your human capital before you move on. All right. The third part where you're, of the Cotter 8-step cycle is, to create a vision. Daenerys has a great vision. She has many quotable quotes, but this is my favorite. I'm not going to stop the wheel. I'm going to break the wheel. It's clear, right? It's simple. You know exactly what she's going to do. She's going to bring it all down. It's inspirational. So make sure that you tell people where you want to go, why you want to go there, keep it simple. If you can't do it in under 5 minutes, if you have this grand idea, but you can't tell someone in under 5 minutes, no one will listen. I mean, we all have ADHD. I can't listen for more than like 2 minutes. You guys are doing really, really good. But I would keep your message very short and aspirational. So aim high. And I just want to show this really quick video. I hope it's going to work here on the importance of why. It's 2 minutes. Loud.
Let's talk about the importance of explaining why. A Harvard researcher, Dr. Ellen Langer, did some research at Harvard University about the importance and the power of giving people a reason. In round 1 of the experiment, she took a line of students waiting to make photocopies in the school library, and then she had one of her students go up at the front of the line and say, "Do you mind if I get in front of you to make photocopies?" Now, just by asking, they found out that 44% of the time the person said, "Sure, go ahead." But of course that means 56% of the time the person was told, "Hey, get to the back of the line and wait like everybody else." In round 2 of the experiment, a student came up to the front of a different line and said, "Do you mind if I get in front of you to make photocopies because my professor will fail me if I don't?" Now with that kind of heartfelt reason, the yes rate shot all the way up to 98%. The most intriguing part of the experiment, though, was the third version, where a student went up to the front of another line and said, "Do you mind if I get in front of you to make photocopies because I need to make photocopies?" And 94% of the time, the person said yes. Now let's think about that for a minute. The difference between a heartfelt reason, "My professor will fail me," and a lame reason, "I need to make copies because I need to make copies," was only 4 percentage points of compliance. But the difference between not giving a reason and giving a reason was at least 50% more yeses. So think about this for a moment. When kids are young, 3 and 4 years old, what's the biggest question they're always asking their parents or their grandparents? Why? Why, Mama? Why, Papa? And when the parents are well rested, they give lots of great answers. Because of this, because of that, because I love you, because I don't want you to get hurt. And when the parents are really stressed out and tired, they'll say things like, "just because." Now those young children grow up to be employees, perhaps employees in your work group, and they still wonder why. And if you don't give them a reason, they tend to not buy into your ideas as much. So here's today's action tip. Give people a reason when you ask them to do things, and you'll notice they're far more compliant and they'll get things done with less aggravation and hassle. That's today's frontline leadership tip. I'm Greg Schenkel.
I'm sorry that you couldn't see the video, but you got the gist of it, right? So the person who just goes to the front of the line and says, "I need copies because I need copies," was almost as effective as the person who went up to the line and had a compelling reason. So I'm not telling you to give crappy reasons for your project, but at least give something. Like give some reason why. All right? Okay, so don't move on without doing that. I'm going to see if this is going to work without starting that video all over again. Okay. All right. So that was the first 3 steps of creating a climate for change. Enabling and engaging the organization. So the first step of that next green bar is to enlist a volunteer army. And Daenerys does this. She recruits the Red Witches, and they go out to all of Slaver's Bay, and they tell her story. They tell her mission, her vision. They tell them that she's going to change everything. She's going to free all the slaves. And they do it over and over and over again. And that's what you have to do. In this stage, you must communicate your vision 1,000 times more than you thought you had to. All right? And in using all the media that you can. So do it in email. Do it face to face. You use all the rich lines of communication. But if you if you under communicate your vision, your project will just peter out, right? People will be like, "Wow, what was that? There was something, I don't know." And then they'll just stop listening. So make sure that you communicate your vision multiple times. The other thing that happens frequently in this stage is that you'll have a group of people, your guiding coalition, who theoretically believe in your change effort, but maybe not enough to actually model that behavior. So they don't actually change themselves. And that creates, and you all know what I'm talking about, I'm sure it's happened, where you have people who tell you to do one thing and they themselves behave differently. And that creates a level of cynicism around your change effort that is impossible to overcome. So if you are going to make change stick, you must be that change. Do it. And your whole team needs to do it. Okay. The next step is to remove barriers. All right? Daenerys happens to have dragons, and she just blows everything up when there's a barrier. I don't suggest that you resort to violence if you run into barriers. However, it is really important that you figure out why it's so hard to do the right thing, right? What you conceive as being the right thing. If you don't figure that out, why is it that what you want to do isn't already being done, right? People always tell you there's good reasons, it's not being done. Well, figure out what those good reasons are, and you must overcome them. And sometimes those good reasons are not processes, they're people, right? There's somebody that's just no. So in those cases, you have to go talk to those, and frequently powerful people. Go talk to those powerful people and use your skills of negotiation and conflict resolution, which those two topics could be topics in and of themselves, right, to talk about. But I think it's really important that you don't avoid those difficult conversations, and they're never as difficult as they are in your head. That's the most conflict I ever have is in my head before I actually engage in conversation with anyone. All right, make it easy for people to do the right thing. Okay, so the next step is to generate some quick wins, right? As I said, I think we're really bad about this in medicine. We don't like to reward ourselves. We're not good at rewarding ourselves. And because of that, things peter out. All right, so Daenerys generates many quick wins. So she first goes to Astapor and through a series of events is able to obtain the Unsullied, which before she just had the Khalasar soldiers, and now she has the Unsullied, which is a group of 8,000 militant soldiers. She frees them, and they choose to stay with her. And because of that, she is able to generate multiple quick wins. So, visible and achievable metrics. They don't have to be grand, but just something that you can step forward on. What are you going to do next? What are you going to do next? Because if you don't have that, then you lose momentum, is really what happens. So reward your innovators here, recognize people for the good work that they're doing, and celebrate any wins that you have. All right. So now all of that, I don't know that any change has actually happened yet, right? This is all in preparation for change. And how often do we actually do all of that? Not very often. So now we're going to actually implement and sustain the change. And the first step in that is to sustain acceleration. So you have all these short-term wins, right, that your group has decided upon. You've celebrated them. And now you have momentum from that. And what Daenerys did is she got the Unsullied, and then she got the Second Sons, and then she took the naval battle of Marine and got herself a naval army. And so all these little wins ended up accumulating and accelerating to where she was able to actually take over all of Slaver's Bay and freed all the slaves, which is what her vision was. This is her in Yunkai. So, use the credibility you've earned because you've celebrated your wins, and use that to gain more wins. And this is a great time to ask for more resources, right? You can say, I've already shown X and XYZ product so far, and to continue showing more product, I need A, B, and C. All right? So once you get to this point, this is a good time to ask for more. And don't be afraid to ask, because people will see what you've already done. This is another point where your laggards or your late adopters can make things difficult for you, because it's very easy at this stage to say, you've done it, good job. You can stop now. And that's what happens, is that people just stop. So here, they haven't instituted their change into the culture, but they feel like they have succeeded, and so they stop. And so their change effort lasts for maybe 6 months, maybe a year, and then it goes away as if it never was. So ask yourself at this point, have you made your change sustainable? Will it live without you? All right. So I don't have this next slide for Game of Thrones because season 8's coming. So we'll see in season 8 what happens if she's able to institute her change after all. But the last step is to institute your change, all right? You've got to inject whatever change effort into the culture. So you need to create new social norms, like this is just the way things are. This is how we've always done things now. So it's not a change for your new group, all right? They just assume that that's the norm. And then if you're in a leadership position, then you should promote people who are in line with your change effort. And then tie that, any successes you've had, back to your change effort. So the reason why I was able to hire 2 more FTE this year is because this change effort gave us so much revenue, or whatever your change effort might be. Okay? All right, so again, the 8 steps: create a sense of urgency, build a guiding coalition, form a strategic vision, enlist a volunteer army or communicate your idea, enable action, generate short-term wins, sustain acceleration, and make it stick. All right, so I'm going to channel my inner Daenerys if I have time. Do I have time? Yeah. If not, I can go through these slides. Okay. Oh yeah, I can do it in 7. All right. So channeling my inner Daenerys, I had led a change effort. I lead many change efforts. So one of the change efforts I led maybe 3 years ago was the implementation of dragon dictation at our institution, which is front-end dictation, right? And you know, being the borderline millennial that I am, I hate to admit that to you all, but being the borderline millennial that I am, I was like, this is going to be super easy. Why would anyone not want this? It's instant gratification. It's upfront. You have control of it. You don't have to talk into a phone. No. The traditionalists really love back-end dictation. They like to pick up the phone, know that there's some person on the other end, understanding everything that they're doing. So how do we do this? We created a sense of urgency because we had a provider survey that went out, and our providers were very dissatisfied. And a lot of that was driven by the EHR. I'm sure you have the same problems at your institutions, all right? And we are under a lot of fiscal pressure to improve our profits, and transcription services are really expensive. They're actually much more expensive than dragon dictation. And then finally, the CEO, because of all the above reasons, put this into the budget. And that definitely creates a sense of urgency, right? You're like, it's in the budget. We're going to do it. We have the money finally. Let's do it. So we formed a big group. There were the CMIOs, and I led the group. Then there were physician champions from all arenas. So we put inpatient, outpatient, ER, and then all the IT groups, so PC technicians, network technicians, project managers, trainers, the super users, which essentially are residents, our computer trainers, help desks, and the CEO backed all of it. So our mission was to provide front-end dictation across inpatient, outpatient, and surgical arenas with the smaller goals of reduced cost of transcription, timely and immediate documentation, and increased efficiency in charting. And all of that was part of a bigger effort to provide, to increase provider satisfaction with the health record. We communicated this idea across many avenues and went to the committee of chairs and the med exec committee for all 3 of our hospitals, went to IT oversight and the resident council, and many, many emails and meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings, like weekly meetings for a year on this. But we got it to work. And then we removed some barriers. So a lot of people, I don't know about you all, don't want to go to training, right? I cannot get anybody to go to training. But if someone comes to you, well, that's totally different. So we set up at the elbow training. People could call, and then the trainers would come to you at whatever site you were at. They would help you while you were working. They would show you all your tips. They would watch your workflow and say, oh, okay, you say this sentence over and over and over again. Let's show you how to make it a shortcut. You can incorporate this into your flow. And that was extremely well received. And we particularly targeted our powerful skeptics. So our late majority people, our late adopters, we got them on board. doing this. We also made sure Dragon mics were on every computer, that the Dragon icon was face up so that you could easily see it. And I went to the CEO and said, we need more support. Like, we cannot install Dragon fast enough on all these machines. The demand is too high. So he gave us overtime for our PC technicians, and he got Dragon Nuance out for 3 weeks to train our trainers, so I had more trainers. All right, we did our quick wins. We did everything instead of going up all at once, right? All of inpatient going up in one day. We did it by floor. So we did the west wing, the south wing, the north wing, clinic by clinic, and so that way we could celebrate the wins on a weekly basis. Any thank you letters were sent to the staff. That means a lot to staff, and that really helped keep our crew going because it took about a year to implement all of this. Building on the change, we've since then added resident QA projects. So one of the surgical residents took one of the classes with the on-site Dragon trainers and developed Dragon templates for every single op note that they do, like a basic template. So now they just say appendicitis op note, and the whole thing pops up, and they just fill in the blanks. And they did that across the board for many of their surgical notes. And it is very, very popular today. We also incorporated other hospital sites, and then we're adding extra electronic charting capability that kind of fits in better with Dragon.
Can I ask what EMR this is inside?
This is in Cerner. Mm-hmm. It's death by 1,000 clicks. So, all right, and then last, we made it stick. So we added it to the onboarding for every provider that comes on the institution. Everyone has to have a Dragon account. As soon as they get EHR access, they get a Dragon account. We make them log in. We make them set up their accounts. That way we could troubleshoot any issues up front. And because we do that now, it's just the thing, right? It's just like getting a mouse. When you walk up to a computer, you have Dragon. We also round on all the units regularly, so we go around, and it's extremely time consuming, but we ask them, like, what issues are you having? What can we help fix? And that keeps it on everyone's forefront. So the end result of all of that is that in 2014, we were transcribing back-end dictation about 2.5 million lines of text, and now we're down to 1 million lines of text. So we've halved that. We obviously still have more work to do. That's been 2.5 or 3 years. And we still have not dropped it down to 0. I mean, change takes a long, long time. All right. So just one more time to reiterate, this is Cotter. This is directly off of his website. He doesn't use the stair example. He likes the circle, which I can understand why, because you're going to do this in cycle over and over again. Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't think we have time for an exercise, but I will hand out these handouts, so that when you think about your project, you can go through kind of the step-by-step thinking that I go through before I make a change effort. I have to apologize, though, on the handout. I misspelled exercise, and I think it's because I was post-night shift, so just excuse me for that. All right, so in conclusion, change is inevitable, but it is manageable, and so you need to try to manage it as much as you can, particularly the unanticipated, unintended outcomes. The diffusion of innovation theory is very helpful to know your target audience. It's helped me just with residents even, trying to talk to them about changing their behavior. It's nice to know where they are on that spectrum. And then finally, Cotter's 8-step method is a useful tool. It's not the only tool, but it is a useful tool for change management. Don't skip steps, and remember that it's going to take much, much, much longer than you think to get what you want done. And just to conclude, if you don't change the direction you're going, you may end up where you're headed. So it's good to know if you're reluctant to change.